The hospital corridor smelled like disinfectant and dying hope. Through the half-open door of room 304, I watched Ethan lean close to my sister Violet, his hand tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with the same gentle motion he'd once used on me. They didn't know I was there. My IV pole stood beside me like a silent witness, the bag of clear liquid swaying slightly as my hand trembled against the cold metal. I'd only left my room to find him, to ask him to stay a little longer tonight because the chemo made everything worse when I was alone. But here he was, in her room, and the way he looked at her made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the cancer eating through my lungs. "She doesn't need to know," Violet whispered, but her smile was bright, alive in a way mine hadn't been in months. Ethan's response was soft, almost tender. "I know, she's been through enough." The words should have cut deeper, but I'd grown numb to pain. Physical pain, emotional pain. It all blurred together into a constant hum of suffering that had become my baseline. I backed away before they could see me. The IV pole's wheels squeaked against the linoleum, but they didn't turn. They were too absorbed in each other, in whatever this was that had bloomed in the spaces where I'd been too sick to exist. My legs felt weak as I made my way back to my own room, 317, 3 doors down from my sister's. The number seemed significant now, that small distance that had somehow become an entire universe. Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The flowers Ethan had brought yesterday were wilting in their vase, their petals browning at the edges. He'd said he chose them because they matched my eyes, but he'd looked at Violet like she was sunlight, and I was just the shadow it cast. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was dying while surrounded by dying flowers, both of us withering in sterile air. The nurse came in to check my vitals, her smile professionally kind. She didn't notice that I'd stopped crying weeks ago, that something inside me had dried up long before my body started failing. She marked something on her clipboard and left, and I was alone again with the steady beep of monitors and the weight of knowing that the man I'd planned to marry was falling in love with my sister, knowing that my parents, who'd always preferred Violet's brightness to my quieter presence, would probably be relieved when I was gone, knowing that I would die here in this room and the world would continue spinning without me. Days passed in the strange, suspended time that hospital rooms create, minutes stretched like taffy, hours compressed into nothing. Ethan visited less. When he came, he smelled like Violet's perfume, that sweet, floral scent she'd worn since high school, the one my mother always complimented. He'd sit in the chair by my bed and talk about work, about the weather, about nothing that mattered. His eyes would drift to his phone, to the door, to anywhere but me. I watched him watch the clock, counting down the minutes until he could leave without seeming cruel. "You should go," I told him one evening when the silence between us had stretched too long. The chemotherapy had left my voice raspy, barely above a whisper. He looked relieved. "Are you sure? I can stay." "No." The word came out steady, final. "You should go." After he left, I lay in the dark and felt my body shutting down in increments. The cancer had spread to my liver, they'd told me that morning. Dr. Williams had used words like palliative and comfortable, his voice gentle in the way that meant he'd given up on fighting. My parents had cried, but even their tears felt distant, like they were grieving someone who'd already gone. My mother had held my hand and said all the right things, but her eyes kept drifting to her phone, to the messages from Violet asking when she'd be done at the hospital. Violet visited me once during those final days. She brought magazines and tried to smile, but guilt made her clumsy. She knocked over the water pitcher and apologized 3 times, her voice too bright, too loud in the quiet room. Her hand shook as she mopped up the water with paper towels, and I realized she was more afraid of my dying than sad about it, afraid of what it would mean for her, for the life she was building with my almost fiancé. "Ethan's been so supportive," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Coming to visit me every day while you're dealing with all this. He's really worried about you." The lie hung between us like smoke. I nodded because what else was there to do? She didn't know I'd seen them. She didn't know that I knew she'd moved into his apartment last week, that she wore the necklace he'd bought for my birthday, the one with the small diamond pendant that I'd never gotten to see because I'd been too sick to celebrate. I let her talk, let her build the lies between us like a wall, and when she finally left, I felt nothing but tired. My parents came that evening. My father stood by the window, unable to look at me, while my mother fussed with my blankets and tried to make small talk about the weather, about Violet's new job, about everything except what was happening. They'd always loved Violet more, not cruelly, not intentionally, but in the way parents love the child who reflects their dreams back at them. Violet was beautiful and charming, the one who'd been a homecoming queen, who'd dated the football captain, who'd made them proud at every turn. I was the older sister who'd been good at school, but never quite sparkled the way they'd wanted me to. "We should talk about arrangements," my mother said finally, her voice breaking. "It's fine," I told her. "Whatever you think is best." She started crying then, and my father held her while I watched from the bed, feeling like I was already a ghost. They left after an hour, promising to come back tomorrow, but knew the visit had exhausted them. Watching someone die was hard work. Harder than actually dying, maybe. The last night came quietly. No dramatic collapse, no sudden crisis. Just the slow dimming of everything. The monitor's beeping grew distant, like someone was turning down the volume on the world. I could hear voices in the hallway. My mother crying, my father's low, steady attempts at comfort. But they felt far away, as if I were already leaving. A nurse came in and adjusted my medication, her touch gentle on my arm. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were sad in a way that told me she knew this was the end. I thought about Ethan then, about the way he'd proposed under the cherry blossoms in Central Park, about how he'd promised forever with such certainty. I thought about Violet, my younger sister, who'd always been brighter, prettier, healthier, the golden child who'd never had to fight for anything, because everything came easily to her perfect hands. I thought about my parents, who would mourn me but would also feel relief that the difficult part was over, that they could return to their lives without the weight of a dying daughter pulling them down. My breath came slower. The pain receded into something soft, almost gentle. I watched the shadows on the ceiling shift with the hallway light and understood that this was the end of it, the suffering, the knowing, the slow death of being unloved. My heartbeat grew quiet in my ears, a distant drum finally falling silent. There was a moment of perfect clarity where I understood that I'd spent my entire life trying to be enough for people who would never see me, and now I was leaving without ever having been seen. And then there was nothing, until there was everything. I opened my eyes to sunlight streaming through sheer white curtains, warm and golden on my face. The air smelled like coffee and fresh laundry, clean in a way that hospital air never was. I breathed deeply, automatically, and felt my lungs expand fully, easily, without the sharp catch of pain that had defined my last year of life. The sensation was so foreign, so impossibly wonderful that I lay there for several minutes just breathing, marvelling at the simple act of filling my lungs with air. I sat up slowly, my hands moving to my chest, feeling for the port where they'd administered chemo. Smooth skin, no scars. I looked down at my arms. No bruises from endless needle sticks, no papery fragility. My skin was healthy, faintly tan, the way it had been before the sickness. I flexed my fingers, watching the tendons move beneath the skin, feeling the strength in them. This body was mine, but it was whole, unbroken. The room around me was familiar in a way that made my heart skip. My apartment. Our apartment. The one Ethan and I had rented 2 years ago, before the diagnosis, before everything fell apart. The blue armchair by the window where I used to read on Sunday mornings. The bookshelf I'd organised by colour, because it made me happy. The framed photo of us at the beach. His arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something I could no longer remember. That photo had been taken in the before time, when I'd still believed in forever. But that photo shouldn't exist. Not here, not now. Because I was dead. I had died. I stood on legs that were strong and steady, walked to the mirror hanging on the bathroom door. The face that looked back was mine, but younger. My hair was thick and fell past my shoulders in dark waves, not the thin, fragile strands that had started falling out in clumps. My eyes were bright, my cheeks full. I looked like I had at 26, healthy and whole and impossibly alive. I touched my face, watching my reflection do the same, confirming that this was real, that I was real. The calendar on the wall caught my attention. April 2022, 3 years before the diagnosis, 4 years before the hospital, before watching Ethan fall in love with my sister, while I withered away in room 17, 4 years before the flowers that matched my eyes, before the gentle lies, before dying alone with the knowledge that I'd never been enough. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Ethan's name lit up the screen. Running late, be home soon, love you. The words should have made me feel something, relief, joy, hope, but I stood there staring at the message, and all I felt was the weight of memory. I remembered everything, every moment of the future that hadn't happened yet, every betrayal, every abandonment, every quiet death of dignity and love, every time he checked his phone while sitting by my hospital bed, every time Violet had smiled too brightly, every time my parents had looked at me with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. This wasn't a dream. This was something else entirely. A second chance, maybe, or a curse disguised as one. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed I'd shared with Ethan in a different timeline, the bed I'd left when I got too sick to be anything but a burden, and let the certainty settle through me like stones, churn sinking through water. I was back. The universe had given me time, had rewound the clock to before everything broke. And I remembered it all, the pain, the loneliness, the way Ethan's hand had felt when it stopped reaching for mine. The knowledge didn't make me angry. Anger would have been too hot, too immediate. What I felt was colder, clearer. I felt awake. I felt like I'd been sleeping my entire first life and had finally opened my eyes to see the truth. That love was conditional, that devotion could evaporate, that the people you trusted most could hurt you in ways that made cancer seem almost merciful. I looked at the phone again, at Ethan's message, and I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and began searching for apartments. 1 bedroom, affordable, available immediately. I scrolled through listings with a strange sense of purpose, looking for a place that would be mine alone. A space where I wouldn't have to die slowly while the person who'd promised forever found someone better. By the time Ethan came home that evening, I had already scheduled 3 viewings for the weekend. He kissed my forehead when he walked in, the gesture automatic, distracted. "How was your day?" "Productive," I said, and it was true in ways he couldn't understand. He talked about his day at the architecture firm, about a difficult client and a project deadline, and I listened with the strange detachment of someone who'd already lived this conversation in a different form. I knew how this story ended. I knew that in 2 years he'd be visiting Violet at the gym, striking up conversations that would turn into coffee dates that would turn into something neither of them would admit until it was too late. I knew that when I got sick, he'd slowly drift away, that his love had an expiration date written in invisible ink. Over the next few weeks, I moved through our life like a ghost. I went to work at the marketing firm where I'd spent 5 years climbing toward a promotion I'd never received in my first life. I smiled at colleagues, attended meetings, and at night I came home to Ethan and let him talk about his day while I planned my exit. I was methodical about it, careful. I withdrew slowly, giving him less of myself each day, preparing for the moment when I would vanish entirely. He didn't notice the change. Why would he? To him, nothing had changed. But I saw everything differently now, the way his attention drifted when I spoke, the way he checked his phone constantly, the way he'd started spending more time at the gym. These were the patterns that had already formed, the hairline cracks that would eventually break us. In my first life, I'd ignored these signs, had convinced myself that love meant overlooking flaws, that devotion required sacrifice. But I knew better now. I knew that sacrifice without reciprocity was just slow suicide. I signed a lease on a studio apartment in Brooklyn. Small, but mine. The landlord was an older woman who reminded me of my grandmother, and she smiled when I told her I was looking for a fresh start. "Good for you," she'd said, handing me the keys. "Too many women stay in places that make them small." I started moving my things gradually. Books first, then clothes, transferring them in bags and boxes while Ethan was at work. He didn't notice the spaces appearing on the shelves, the gaps in the closet. He was already looking elsewhere, already preparing for the life he'd eventually build without me, even if he didn't know it yet. When I finally told him I was leaving, he looked more confused than hurt. We were sitting in the living room on a Sunday evening, the same living room where we'd spent countless nights watching movies and planning a future that would never arrive. I'd rehearsed the words, but in the end, I kept it simple. "I'm moving out," I said. He blinked, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. "What? When did you decide this?" "A while ago." "Is this about something I did?" he asked, standing up and setting his cup down with a clink. "Sienna, talk to me. What's going on?" "No," I said, and it was the truth. It was about something he was going to do, something he would have done if I'd stayed. "This isn't about you, it's about me." "I don't understand. I thought we were happy." "I know you did." He tried to argue, to convince me to stay. He said all the things people say when they're losing something they'd taken for granted. That he loved me, that we could work through whatever this was, that he didn't want to lose me. But his heart wasn't in it. I could see the relief lurking behind his concern, the small voice in his head already calculating his freedom. He would miss the idea of me, the convenience of our relationship, but he wouldn't miss me. Not really. Not the way people miss the air when it's taken away. I left on a Saturday morning while he was at the gym, the same gym where he'd eventually meet Violet, when she started going there to get in shape. I'd packed the last of my things into my car, took one final look at the apartment we'd shared, and drove away without looking back. The city streets were quiet that early, and I felt a strange sense of peace as I navigated toward my new life. This was what freedom felt like. Lighter than I'd imagined, cleaner. My new apartment felt empty at first, but empty was better than dying slowly. I furnished it simply, a bed, a desk, a small table for two that I ate at alone. I hung curtains that I'd chosen myself, bought plants that I would be responsible for keeping alive, painted one wall a deep blue that Ethan would have hated. Every choice was mine. Every decision reflected only my preferences, my needs, my desires. For the first time in my life, I was building a space that belonged entirely to me. I threw myself into work with the focus of someone who knew exactly where the opportunities were. I knew which clients would sign, which campaigns would fail, which presentations to volunteer for. I remembered which of my ideas had been dismissed in my first life and presented them earlier, with more confidence to different people. Within 6 months, I had the promotion I'd been denied before. My boss, Jennifer, called me into her office on a Friday afternoon and offered me the position of Senior Creative Director. "You've been doing exceptional work," she said, smiling across her desk. "Honestly, Sienna, I don't know what changed, but you've been on fire lately." Everything changed, I wanted to say. I died and came back and learnt that the only person I can truly rely on is myself. But instead, I smiled and said, Thank you. I won't let you down. Violet called me sometimes. Her voice on the phone was bright and careless, full of stories about her life. She'd started a new job at a PR firm, was dating someone casually, had joined a new gym. She didn't know that I knew her future too, that she'd meet Ethan at that gym, that she'd feel guilty but not guilty enough, that she'd move into his apartment while I was dying in a timeline that no longer existed. I listened to her talk and felt nothing but a distant kind of sadness for who she might have been if circumstances had been different. You should come over for dinner, she said one evening. Mum and Dad keep asking about you. They say you've been distant. I've been busy with work, I told her, which was true but not the whole truth. Too busy for family? The question hung between us. In my first life, I would have felt guilty, would have rearranged my schedule to make everyone else happy. But I'd learned that family was conditional too, that blood meant less than presence, that the people who shared your DNA could still choose your sister over you when it mattered. Yes, I said simply. Too busy? She laughed, thinking I was joking, and changed the subject. But I meant it. I was too busy building a life worth living to waste time with people who would eventually abandon me. My parents noticed the change in me. You seem different, my mother said over Sunday dinner, one of the few family obligations I still maintained, though less frequently than before. Harder, somehow. I'm just focused, I told her, cutting into my chicken with precise movements. My father frowned, setting down his fork. Your mother's worried about you. We both are. You barely call, you never visit, and when you do, you seem distant. I'm fine, I said, meeting his eyes steadily. I'm actually better than I've ever been. They exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that long-married couples develop. They didn't understand, and I didn't expect them to. They'd raised 2 daughters, had loved us both, but they'd never seen how their preference for Violet had shaped my life. How I'd spent years trying to be good enough, quiet enough, accomplished enough to earn the same easy affection they gave her. How I'd failed at being their favourite and had almost died believing that failure was my fault. Violet was at that dinner too, and she kept trying to draw me into conversation, to recreate the closeness we'd once had as children. But that closeness had been built on my willingness to be second, to accept less, to celebrate her victories while hiding my own disappointments. I'd outgrown it, the way you outgrow clothes that no longer fit. A year passed, then another. I rose through the company, eventually accepting a position at a competing firm that doubled my salary and gave me creative control over major campaigns. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, nothing that demanded pieces of myself I was no longer willing to give. I went to gallery openings and took myself to nice restaurants. I travelled to places I'd always wanted to see, Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona, and I sent postcards to no one because the experiences were mine alone. I heard about Ethan through mutual friends. He was seeing someone, they said. Someone serious. I nodded and changed the subject, and later that night I sat in my apartment and felt something like peace. Not happiness, exactly, but the calm certainty of having chosen myself, of having looked at the future I'd been given and deciding to write a different ending. The call came on a Tuesday evening 3 years after I'd left Ethan. I was working late in my home office, reviewing campaign proposals, when my phone rang. My mother's voice was strained in a way that immediately transported me back to the hospital, to the sound of monitors beeping and the smell of antiseptic. It's Violet. She's in the hospital. My first instinct was memory. My hospital, my room, my sister visiting me with guilt in her eyes. But this was different. This was her story now, not mine. The symmetry of it was almost poetic. What happened? I asked, my voice steady. Pneumonia. It got bad quickly. She's been sick for a week, but you know your sister. She didn't want to worry anyone. By the time she finally went to the emergency room, it had spread to both lungs. Can you come? I could hear the expectation in her voice, the assumption that, of course, I would drop everything, and rushed to Violet's side. That's what family did. That's what the old Sienna would have done without question. "Which hospital?" I asked. "St. Catherine's. She's on the 3rd floor, room 312. Room 312. 3 doors away from where I died in a different life. The universe had a cruel sense of humour. "I'll send flowers," I said. "Flowers?" My mother's voice rose. "Sienna, your sister is seriously ill. She needs you." "I'll send flowers," I repeated, gentler this time. "Beautiful ones. But I can't come right now. I have work commitments." "Work commitments?" She sounded shocked, almost angry. "Your sister is in the hospital. Work can wait." But I'd learned that work was the only thing that didn't leave you when you got sick, that didn't choose your sister over you, that didn't promise forever and then count down the minutes until it could escape. Work had given me power when love had left me powerless. "I'll send flowers," I said a 3rd time, and hung up before she could argue further. I went because she was still my sister, because some bonds persist even when we wish they wouldn't. But I went on my terms, in my time. It was Thursday evening, 3 days after the initial call, when I finally drove to St. Catherine's. The hospital was different from the one I died in, but the smell was the same, antiseptic and fear. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and I could hear the distant sound of monitors beeping, of families crying, of the machinery that kept people alive when their bodies wanted to quit. I found her room on the 3rd floor, and outside stood Ethan. He'd aged. Not badly, but enough that I could see the years in the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair at the temples. He looked tired, wearing jeans and a rumpled button-down shirt, and there was something defeated in his posture that hadn't been there before. He was leaning against the wall, staring at his phone, but he looked up when he heard my footsteps. "Sienna," he said, and my name in his mouth was strange, like a word from a language he'd half forgotten. "Ethan." We stood in the hallway like strangers, because that's what we were now. 3 years and an entire lifetime of difference stretched between us. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. Finally, "Thank you for coming. It would mean a lot to her." "How is she?" I asked, though I already knew. I'd called the hospital before coming, had spoken to a nurse who told me exactly what I needed to know. "Better," he said, relief evident in his voice. "The antibiotics are working. She'll probably be discharged in a few days." I nodded. I'd known she would recover. The pneumonia was serious but treatable. She wasn't dying. This wasn't the symmetry I'd half expected, half feared. She would be fine. "That's good," I said. "Listen," Ethan started, his hand coming up to rub the back of his neck. "I know things ended badly between us, and I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I'm sorry for how I handled things, for not being what you needed." The apology was years too late and directed at the wrong crime. He was apologising for our breakup, for a relationship I'd ended cleanly and definitively. He didn't know he should be apologising for a future that would never happen now, for abandoning a version of me who no longer existed. "It's fine," I said. "We weren't right for each other." "No," he agreed quietly. "I guess we weren't. But you seem good. Your parents mentioned you're doing really well at work." "I am. I'm glad." He hesitated then. "She talks about you sometimes. Violet, she misses you." The statement settled between us. I wondered what version of me Violet missed. The older sister who'd always been there, who'd put her needs second, who'd made space for Violet to shine. That person was gone, had died in a hospital bed and hadn't come back. "I should go in," I said. Ethan stepped aside and I pushed open the door to room 312. Violet lay in the bed, smaller than I remembered, her face pale against the white pillows. An oxygen cannula rested beneath her nose, and an IV ran into her left arm. She was awake, and when she saw me, tears filled her eyes. "You came," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Of course. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. The hospital bracelet on her wrist looked too big, too stark against her delicate skin. I'm scared, she admitted. I know. And I did know. I knew exactly how it felt to lie in a hospital bed while your body failed, while the people you loved slowly stopped seeing you as yourself and started seeing you as your illness. I knew the fear that came with every breath that didn't fill your lungs quite enough, every fever spike, every test result that could change everything. But I also knew something she didn't. I knew from the doctor's notes at the nurse's station, which I'd glimpsed on my way in, that she would recover. The pneumonia was responding to treatment. Her oxygen saturation was improving. She would be fine. Ethan's been here every day, she said, her voice gaining a hint of warmth. He barely leaves. Mom and Dad have been here too, but Ethan... She smiled slightly. He's been amazing. That's good, I said, and meant it. Not for her, but for the symmetry of it. That he'd stayed for her when he'd left me. That he'd given her the devotion he'd withheld from me. It proved something I'd needed to know. That the problem had never been my worthiness of love, but his capacity to give it. And that capacity, it seemed, was conditional. Violet was beautiful even in sickness, even with pale skin and chapped lips. She would recover and return to being the golden child, the one worth staying for. I'd been sick in a way that was ugly and endless, that had stolen my hair and my strength and had made me into someone he couldn't love. The difference mattered, even if it shouldn't have. I was hoping you'd come visit sooner, Violet said, her fingers tightening on mine. Mom said you were too busy with work. I sent flowers, I said, gesturing to the arrangement on her bedside table. White roses and purple orchids, expensive and beautiful. They're gorgeous, she said, but I wanted to see you. We barely talk anymore, Sienna. I miss my sister. The words should have touched me, should have broken through the careful distance I'd maintained. But all I felt was tired. Tired of being expected to give more than I'd received. Tired of being the one who had to sacrifice and understand and make space. I'm here now, I said simply. We talked for a while longer, about her job, about the pneumonia, about nothing important. She asked about my life, and I gave her the surface version. Work was good, I was seeing someone casually, I was thinking about getting a cat. None of it was true except the work part, but she didn't need to know that. She needed the version of me that was fine, that was moving on, that hadn't been fundamentally changed by experiences she would never understand. When I finally left, I kissed her forehead the way our mother used to do when we were children. Rest. You'll be home soon. Promise you'll visit again? She asked, her eyes pleading. We'll see, I said, and slipped out before she could press further. Ethan was still in the hallway, now sitting in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed to exist only in hospitals. He looked up when I emerged. How is she? Tired, but better. He nodded. Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy. I almost laughed at that. He had no idea what wasn't easy. Dying wasn't easy. Watching the person you loved fall for your sister wasn't easy. Coming back from death and rebuilding your entire life from scratch wasn't easy. Visiting a hospital room was simple by comparison. Take care of her, I said instead, and walked away. Over the following weeks, I sent flowers to Violet's room. Beautiful arrangements, orchids and lilies, roses and hydrangeas. Each bouquet came with a simple card. Wishing you well, Sienna. But I didn't visit again. I called once, spoke to her for 5 minutes about her recovery, and promised to see her soon. It was a promise I had no intention of keeping. My mother called, confused and hurt. Why won't you come see her? She asks about you every day. She doesn't understand why you're being so cold. I'm sending flowers, I said, examining my nails. I'd gotten them done that afternoon, a deep red that made me feel powerful. beautiful flowers. That's not cold. But she's your sister. She needs you. She has Ethan. She has you and Dad. She has friends. She doesn't need me specifically. She just wants me to play the role I'm supposed to play. What role? My mother's voice was sharp now, defensive. The devoted older sister. The one who drops everything. The one who makes herself smaller so Violet can be bigger. That's not fair, Sienna. We've never asked you to make yourself smaller. But they had. Not in words, not intentionally, but in 1,000 small ways over a lifetime. Every time they'd praised Violet's accomplishments with enthusiasm and greeted mine with approval. Every time they'd excused her selfishness as confidence and criticised my boundaries as coldness. Every time they'd chosen her tears over my silence. I'm sending flowers, I repeated. That's all I can give right now. My father called next, trying a different approach. Your mother is worried about you. We both are. This isn't like you. How do you know what I'm like? I asked quietly. When have you ever really looked? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. Violet recovered, as I'd known she would. She went home with Ethan, back to the life they'd built together. I heard later that my absence had hurt her deeply, that she didn't understand why I'd seemed so cold. My mother tried to bridge the distance, inviting me to family dinners, suggesting we all go on vacation together. But I remained politely, firmly separate. You've changed, my father said during one of the increasingly rare family dinners I attended. It was Sunday afternoon, and we were sitting in their dining room, the same room where we'd celebrated every holiday, every birthday, every achievement. The wallpaper was the same floral pattern from my childhood, but I saw it differently now. Saw how the flowers were faded, how the edges were peeling, how something could look the same while slowly falling apart. Yes, I agreed, and offered no explanation. We just want to understand, my mother pressed. Did we do something to hurt you? Did Violet? Could have told them everything then. Could have explained about the hospital, about dying alone, about watching Ethan fall in love with Violet while I withered away. But that story belonged to a timeline that no longer existed, and they wouldn't have believed it anyway. They would have thought I was being dramatic, that I was imagining slights that didn't exist. You didn't do anything, I said, which was both true and false. I'm just focused on building my life the way I want it. Without your family in it? Violet asked, and there were tears in her eyes. Real tears, genuine hurt. She truly didn't understand. With my family at a distance that feels safe, I corrected gently. The years continued to pass. I met someone, Daniel, a photographer who'd moved to New York from Seattle. He was quiet and thoughtful, with kind eyes and careful hands that created beautiful images from ordinary moments. We met at a gallery opening, started talking about the exhibit, and didn't stop for 3 hours. He asked for my number, and I gave it to him without the hesitation that had guarded me for so long. Our relationship grew slowly, built on a foundation of genuine interest and mutual respect. He didn't try to fix me, or save me, or change me. He just saw me, the real me, sharp edges and carefully maintained boundaries and all, and stayed. He saw me and chose me every day without conditions. When I told him about Ethan, about how I'd left seemingly without reason, he listened without judgment. We were lying in bed in my apartment, the morning light filtering through the curtains, and I'd decided he deserved some version of the truth. I knew it wasn't going to work, I said, tracing patterns on his chest. I knew he wasn't capable of staying when things got hard. How did you know? Daniel asked, his fingers running through my hair. I just did. I couldn't tell him about the death, about the hospital, about the future I'd already lived. Sometimes you just know. Do you regret it? He asked. No, I said, and I realized it was true. I don't regret a single thing. We were married in a small ceremony 2 years later. Just us, the officiant, and 2 friends as witnesses. We exchanged vows on a beach in Maine, the ocean wind whipping my dress around my legs, and when Daniel kissed me, I felt something I'd never felt with Ethan, the certainty of being chosen completely, of being loved without reservation. My parents came to a small reception we held afterward, confused but supportive in their way. Violet sent a card but didn't attend. She was pregnant with her first child, she explained in a text message, and wasn't feeling well enough to travel. I sent an expensive gift from the registry I knew she'd created, and felt nothing but the mildest curiosity about whether she'd named the baby something classic or trendy. The truth was, I'd moved so far beyond the life I'd almost lived that my old family felt like characters from a story I'd read long ago. I loved them in the abstract way you love people you're connected to by history, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. I'd taken that power back and had given it to no one. 5 years after my rebirth, I stood in the office I'd earned. Large windows overlooking the city. My name on the door in elegant letters. Sienna Chen, Creative Director. I'd risen through the company to become the Director of Creative Strategy, leading campaigns for brands that reached millions. The work was challenging and rewarding, and I was good at it in ways I'd never had the chance to be before. I'd never been sick, had never lost months to chemotherapy, had never had to choose between my health and my career. My phone rang one afternoon, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sienna? The voice was familiar but aged, roughened by time or tears or both. Ethan, I don't know if I should be calling, but I needed to talk to you. I waited, saying nothing. Through the window, the city spread out beneath me, vast and indifferent. People moved through their lives below, tiny from this height, each of them carrying their own stories of love and loss and rebirth. Violet and I are separating, he said finally. It's been coming for a while. We've been trying to make it work for the baby, but... He trailed off. I think I called because I wanted to tell you that you were right. To leave, I mean. You saw something I couldn't. Or maybe you just knew yourself better than I knew either of us. The admission hung between us. I thought about the version of me who'd loved him, who'd planned a future with him, who'd died believing she hadn't been enough for him to stay. Okay, I said, because what else was there? I'm sorry, he continued, for whatever I did that made you go, for not fighting harder to make you stay, for not being whatever it was you needed. The apology sat between us like something fragile. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, about the hospital, the cancer, watching him fall in love with my sister while I died, about the second chance I'd been given and how I'd used it to burn away the life that would have killed me. But that story belonged to a timeline that no longer existed, to a woman who had died so that I could live. I appreciate you saying that, I said instead. I hope you figure things out. I hope you learn to stay. Are you happy? He asked suddenly. I heard you got married, that you're doing really well at work. I am, I said, and realised that it was completely true. I'm very happy. Good, that's good, you deserve it. After we hung up, I stood at the window and watched the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere out there, Violet was probably packing boxes, or signing divorce papers, or crying in a room that felt too empty. Somewhere, Ethan was realising that the grass on the other side had been just as brown as the grass he'd left behind, that love required more than just attraction and convenience. Somewhere, my parents were trying to understand how their daughters had ended up so far apart, wondering what they'd missed, what signs they'd failed to see. But here, in this moment, in this office I'd earned through my own determination, I was exactly where I needed to be. That night I went home to Daniel and the life we'd built together. He was in the kitchen cooking dinner while listening to a podcast about landscape photography, And he smiled when I walked in, a real smile full of warmth and presence. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing my cheek. He smelled like garlic and olive oil, like home. "Interesting," I said, wrapping my arms around him from behind. Ethan called. "Yeah? What did he want?" I told him about the conversation, about the apology and the questions. Daniel listened while stirring the pasta, his movements easy and familiar, then turned to face me. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," I said. And I meant it. We ate dinner together, talking about our days and our plans for the weekend. Daniel had a show coming up at a gallery in Brooklyn, and I'd agreed to help him select the final prints. Later, we sat on the couch while he edited photos on his laptop and I read a book, our legs tangled together in comfortable silence. This was what love was supposed to feel like, easy and present, without the constant fear of abandonment, without having to make yourself smaller to fit someone else's idea of who you should be. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. There was a message from my mother. "Violet's having a hard time with the separation. She could really use her sister right now. Please call her." I thought about it for a long moment. Thought about the girl I'd been who would have dropped everything to rush to her sister's side, who would have absorbed Violet's pain as her own, who would have made herself smaller to make room for someone else's crisis, who would have given and given until there was nothing left, and still it wouldn't have been enough. But that girl had died in a hospital room, abandoned by the people who should have loved her most. I typed a brief response. "I hope she feels better soon. She has you and Dad and Ethan. She'll be fine." Then I turned off the phone and climbed into bed beside my husband. Daniel pulled me close, his breath warm against my neck. "I love you," he murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too," I whispered back. I lay in the dark, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the solid warmth of his presence beside me. Through the window, the city lights glowed softly, constant and unchanging. I thought about the flowers I'd sent to Violet's hospital room, beautiful, appropriate, and utterly impersonal. I thought about how I'd never visited more than once, how I'd drawn a line and refused to cross it, how I'd chosen my own peace over her need for comfort. Some people might call it cruel. My mother certainly did, in her careful, worried way. My father probably thought I was holding a grudge they couldn't understand. But I knew the truth. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. In my first life, I had given everything, my health, my dignity, my sense of self, and I had died alone, unloved, with nothing to show for my devotion but an empty room and a sister who'd stolen my almost husband. In this life, I had chosen differently. I had chosen myself, had built boundaries that kept me safe, had learned that love without reciprocity was just another form of self-destruction, and that choice had saved me. I closed my eyes and felt the peace settle over me like a blanket, warm, complete, and entirely mine. The past no longer haunted me. The future no longer frightened me. I had taken the pain the universe had given me and transformed it into something unbreakable. The absolute certainty that I deserved better and the courage to demand it. Somewhere in the city, Ethan was probably lying awake, regretting choices he'd made, realizing too late that he'd never learned how to stay. Somewhere, Violet was learning what it felt like to be left, to be the one who wasn't enough, to watch someone you loved slowly drift away. The karmic wheel had turned, not through my intervention, but through the simple force of their own actions catching up to them. They would suffer in their own ways, would carry the weight of their choices through the rest of their lives. Ethan would move from relationship to relationship, always leaving when things got difficult, never understanding why love never lasted. Violet would raise her child with a father who was only half present, would feel the ache of abandonment, would finally understand what it meant to be second choice. My parents would watch their golden child struggle and would finally see the cracks in the pedestal they'd built for her. And I would be fine. more than fine. I would thrive. But here, in this moment, in this bed, in this life I'd built from the ashes of the one that had killed me, here, I was free. I smiled in the darkness, a quiet expression that no one saw but that I felt deep in my bones. This was victory, not loud or dramatic, not announced or celebrated. Just the simple, profound triumph of a woman who had died and been reborn, and who had chosen to live differently the second time around. The last thought I had before sleep took me was this: they had taught me how to die, but I had taught myself how to live, and I would never, ever forget the difference.